Alright, CNT140, Chapter 5. We just got done talking fiber sizes, so we're going to talk about some other characteristics of fiber. The next thing they mentioned after this was our optical fiber family tree. That's where we left off. So the next thing they mention about is mixing fiber types. Yes, you can't mix and match fiber types. Think about taking a garden hose. If you have two garden hoses the same size and you kind of like screw them together, as long as you have a nice tight connection there, you're really not going to have much water leak, maybe a drop or two. But if I take two garden hoses that are different sizes and try to put them together, you're going to have a lot of water leaking out of that connection because it's not coupled together well. And that's exactly what they're showing you here. If I have a mixture of 50 to 62.5, if I'm going from 50 to 62.5, it'll capture a lot of it, but some's going to leak. If I go the other way, 62.5 to 50, it's definitely not going to all fit in that smaller core. We're going to have a lot of water squirting out, if you will. In this case, a lot of light. So mixing and matching fibers, you have to be aware and make sure you're not doing that, which brings you to the color code of your cable jacket, letting you know what type of fiber you're dealing with, and also your connectors, letting you know what fiber you're dealing with. So pay attention to the color code as we're connecting things, so we're not connecting a large core to a small core, vice versa kind of thing. Some fiber specifications. Okay. We talked about the size, the core cladding diameter. That lets you know the size of fiber you're dealing with, multi-mode, single mode, etc. There is attenuation coefficient represented in decibels per kilometer. That lets us know kind of like the length capability of this fiber. How much is the signal going to weaken over distance, letting us know approximately the distance we're going to get. And then the bandwidth, megahertz per kilometer as well. Well, if our signal weakens, our bandwidth capability is going to weaken over distance. With that, we have some chromatic dispersion and polarization mode dispersion that might be along with that fiber as well, letting you know the characteristics of that fiber. They mentioned in here manufacturers might have some other ones that are usually for the manufacturing side, not really so much for us, the consumer user side, if you will. So attenuation, primary spec optical fiber is attenuation. Again, remember that's the weakening of the signal over distance. And this is usually expressed in loss of the fiber over distance. So how many decibels per kilometer? How many decibels signal loss is there over the distance per kilometer? Now the fiber attenuation is going to vary with the wavelength of light. As we talked before, and we'll talk again now, at certain wavelengths, the signal attenuates very much, a large amount, if you will. So that's why we tend to transmit in these areas around those large attenuation bands, in the 850, in the 1300, in the 1550, around these high attenuation bands. The reason being, the attenuation of optical fiber is a result of two main factors, absorption and scattering. Absorption, as the light is traveling through the fiber, absorption is caused by the light of the fiber hitting water molecules in the glass and heating it up. And this is because the primary absorbers are the residual hydroxide elements, or I shouldn't say elements, but the particles, if you will, that are in the glass. So it hits those and tends to absorb and create heat. And that mode of light, if you will, is no longer moving down the fiber. The absorption tends to occur at discrete wavelengths. These wavelengths here, this 1,000 nanometers, 1,400 nanometers, and right off the chart over here, 1,600 nanometers. So these tend to be avoided when we're sending, the light signals that are used tend to avoid those absorption bands, those high absorption bands. So that is one of the factors of attenuation fiber, the absorption, as the modes of light travel through and hit those hydroxide atoms, if you will, in there. Now, many fibers today are low water peak, where the absorption bands have been greatly reduced, allowing for things like your dense wavelength division multiplexing, coarse wavelength division multiplexing. They talk about these low water peak fibers here in a little bit. The other part of attenuation is caused by scattering. So we have some modes of light being absorbed. Some other modes of light might actually hit an atom in the glass structure, if you will, and literally hit it and kind of reflect. That is caused by those modes of light hitting these charged ions in the silicon matrix. These charged ions act like little mirrors, so as that mode of light is going down through the fiber, it might hit that little charged ion in the silicon atom and reflect off of that and start scattering. Again, scattering happens at certain wavelengths, so those tend to be avoided. And again, it happens kind of in these wavelength bands here. Actually, I'll show you here. These wavelength bands here to try to avoid that. Now, the other part of this is, and they tell you here, as the wavelength increases, this drops. As the wavelength increases, this drops. So for long distance transmission, it's advantageous to use the longest practical wavelength to reduce the amount of attenuation. So therefore, these the light sources used for fiber optics tend to hit these low absorption bands, the 850, 1300, 1550. And that's the reason those have come up, because they're the least absorbing, least reflecting, least scattering bands. And that's why we tend to use those bands here, these boom, 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 in kind of the overall spectrum of things. Plastic fiber has more limited wavelength bandwidth. That's why it uses the 660 nanometer LED sources for the sending the signal across your plastic optical fiber. Now, with bend-insensitive fibers, again, stress can cause bending losses, as we said before. Manufacturers now do bend-insensitive fibers in single-mode and multi-mode that are more tolerant of bends, which makes handy for patch cords and maybe connections in closets and in tight areas. So those can be advantageous in certain applications. Another one is your low water peak fibers. We said a little bit ago, we'll mention it again now. The low water peak fibers are from careful manufacturing of the fiber to reduce the water in the actual glass structure, if you will, reducing the amount of those hydroxide ions that cause that high absorption. So our low water peak fibers can have a dramatically less reduction in attenuation because of that high the high caution in the production of the glass fiber, reducing that down to almost nil loss, if you will. So those can be used for your wavelength division multiplexing, the coarse and dense wavelength division multiplexing. Dispersion. Okay, so we're talking about some other characteristics now. Dispersion, remember, as we send a pulse of light down the fiber, it's going to spread out as it goes. That's your dispersion. There are things that cause this and make it worse depending on the type of fiber. We can actually have modal dispersion and chromatic dispersion. Modal dispersion is a big problem for multi-mode fiber. I have lots of rays of light representing my one. So those rays of light can, as we launch them into the fiber, some are going to bounce a whole bunch like this. They call those the low order, excuse me, those are the high order. I apologize. Those are the high order modes of light because they're taking a longer distance to get to the end. So this mode of light is still kind of bouncing its way down, only made it part way. Meanwhile, the mode that was kind of aimed right in the middle has already made it to the end. Well, that spreading out of those rays of light, those modes of light, is that modal dispersion. I think I have another picture here showing, yeah. So your higher orders take longer to get through. Secondly, they mentioned because they're taking long to get through, the likelihood of them of hitting those ions and getting absorbed or scattered is a lot higher. So the higher orders tend to take longer, but they also tend to get scattered or absorbed in the fiber, which again causes attenuation of your signal. That's when they bring in this term of equilibrium modal distribution. When I have a length of fiber and these high orders start getting filtered out through absorption and scattering, the low order modes of light have made it through and it's kind of like balanced out. Those low orders are making it through. I have filtered out all those high orders, and they call this now kind of like an equilibrium of my signal getting through. Single mode fiber does not really have the modal effect because I have one ray of light. So that's pretty much a non-issue with single mode fiber, modal dispersion. However, we do have issues with chromatic dispersion. Okay, chromatic dispersion, which we'll get to here in just a second. So modal dispersion is that spreading out over distance, okay, which is a big effect on multimode fiber, not so much single mode. But both can be affected by your chromatic dispersion. And here they're talking about the whole modal dispersion is a big issue with your multimode fiber, okay, especially your step index, less so on the graded index, but still an issue for step index. Now, the chromatic dispersion, as we send the light signal down through, as it starts bending, it starts breaking into component pieces, almost like sending light through a prism and breaking it out into all the colors. Well, that causes the signal to spread out over distance as well. Now, that can be an effect, that can be a problem in both single mode and multi-mode. The solution for that is your tight spectral width light source. If I use a laser light source that has a very narrow spectral width, there's not much there to spread out, so that'll reduce the amount of chromatic dispersion that I might have. There are two factors that can cause chromatic dispersion in single mode, and that's your material dispersion and waveguide dispersion. With material dispersion, there is the differences in the core to cladding can have, and actually the production of the fiber optic itself can have little variances. So over the distance, the material itself might cause it to spread out, just because of the production of the core to cladding and the glass and so forth. Not a huge effect, but over distances with high speeds, it can have effect. The other one, waveguide dispersion, can be a problem. The wavelength being used is actually larger than the core. So that signal traveling through, some is in the core and some is in the cladding. And the cladding is a different index of refraction. So as they show you here, the pulse of light goes down through, and the part that's in the cladding that's transmitted is going to get slowed down. So now we have the light kind of being spread out, that light pulse being spread out because of the core to cladding difference. They can manufacture these cables to kind of work that out, where you have a zero dispersion wavelength fiber. They can engineer this to kind of work this out. So there is fibers that can do that. And here's some of those they're mentioning here, engineered dispersion. There is also fiber that can be used to help. If you have a signal that's spread out, I can run it through a dispersion compensating fiber and get rid of that and bring that signal back nice and tight again before it goes on your long distance runs, your long connections. And here they talk about dispersion over distance. If I have a bunch of different fibers connected through over time, the chromatic dispersion might be an issue, so you might actually do a measurement of that, of the whole system once it's installed. With fiber, there's also a polarization mode dispersion. And this has to do with when we send light through single mode here, light tends to travel in two component pieces that are perpendicular, or right angle to each other, perpendicular to each other. And because of that, core to cladding again, they're going to those two component pieces are going to travel at different speeds down through, so they will tend to spread out. The result looks like this, but if I look at it in this angle here, this one going down through makes it, spreads out a little bit. This one travels at a different rate, so they're a little bit disjointed as they get to the other end. This is caused by either material or waveguide. Material can have to do with the production of the fiber and basically how perfectly round it is. Anything out of perfectly round can affect this, where I have the differences in those two transmissions. And the other one has to do with the bending of the actual fiber. The stress on the fiber itself can cause that dispersion, that polarization mode dispersion, because it's bent and one component travels at a different rate than the other component. So some effects on our single mode fiber. And there is our Chapter 5.